Hi.
Hello.
Okay, so I see you have a guest in the back room there. I guess it's your roommate. Yeah, I mean, typically I don't see people because people don't typically turn on their video cameras, and I don't want to argue with them. So I'm kind of surprised to see people's faces. So okay, so let me share the screen for your paper here, and make sure I open up the right screen. And there we go. And so. Okay, so let me save this again, just in case I will make some more changes to it. And so let me go here. And I think that's, yeah, that's it. Okay. And there's that. I got to make something here. Like okay, so you can see that in the first paper. So I wrote, okay. Yeah, so the topic is the rise of Trump to election as U.S. president is primarily a consequence of the United States of America being overextended in foreign policy commitment. So, yeah, so, whenever you use information from another source, oh, by the way, this is being recorded, so I'll send you the link to the recording.
Okay.
Watch it in. But it's that whenever you use information from another source, you should cite the source in the text. So you say in 2012, the Chicago Council on Global Affairs published its report on what Americans actually think about the world. So when you have CFR, so I look at the bottom here, and I don't see CFR.
Yeah.
Okay, so you want to make sure that that's put in there, and
Okay.
I think that's Council on Foreign Relations. So and so of course, one of my tasks here is to help people improve their already excellent English language skills to in terms of what scholarly writing typically requires in English. And so, we don't use contractions in formal writing. And so you can just, because it's a form of informal speech. So
Okay.
it's clear that a large part of the population agrees that USA should take a main place in the world, but others believe that some actions in the past were unnecessary. Only 14% of the American people think that helping to bring a democratic form of government empowered in other nations is acceptable. Furthermore, of course, that's a bit old. I mean, that's 9 years old. Maybe you think that that's probably pretty reflective of how somebody, if you're arguing that explains why Trump's focus on make America great again or America first, that he was able to exploit that belief that America is overextended and because it's trying to spread human rights everywhere and use its military and economic resources to, and that might be true, and that might well be, and I think it is true. I mean, I think a lot of people do feel that way, but at the same time, it would be interesting to make a connection between that and yet how, even under Trump, like we talked about in class, there was no reduction in the military budget, right? Even though many people might say, yeah, I favor Donald Trump, because the previous presidents were too willing to go to war. If people were unwilling to go to war because they didn't want that money wasted on war, instead for Americans to have that money, either in the form of just letting them keep the money, not taxing them to pay for the military, or using the money for something else, like programs for education or medical care, you would think that there would have been more of an effort to cut that, to restrict the size of that budget. And I guess what I'm trying to get to is Hans Morgenthau, in that theorist of realism, he was, as I mentioned in the class, he was a European. He was a German who lost many of his family, were killed in the Holocaust. They were German Jews. And so he comes from that continental European tradition that emphasizes the fact that people themselves are pretty much, I don't think, I hate using this term, they're not rational. People say one thing and then they want something else. They do something else all the time. And they're not even aware about their inherent contradictions. And Hans Morgenthau, reflecting that worldview that goes back to Sigmund Freud, right? In terms of subconscious, and people say one thing, but they desire something else, and they know what they must say in polite society, so that other people like them and so they can like themselves, but they're really driven by deep down motivations that they themselves do not necessarily recognize or understand. And that's reflected in Hans Morgenthal's theory of classical realism, that, yeah, people say one thing, that we're overextended, we're all over the world, but at the same time, they don't like seeing America just leave Kabul, Afghanistan, after 20 years and the pro-American government just disappear. You can say, well, 20 years is too long. I mean, but it looked humiliating. Now we'll see how much of a price the Democrats and the Biden administration pay for that. Because, Hans Morgenthau would say, yeah, okay, I understand that. Americans, of course, you have to be wise. You have to do things in a way that allows people to continue to feel good about themselves as Americans. Even if they felt overextended in Afghanistan, or they think they're overextended, at the same time, they don't like losing. And America clearly appears to have lost. Unless you, Joe Biden, succeed in convincing Americans that, aha, we didn't lose, we won, ha-ha. And again, the examples that comes to mind is, for example, Richard Nixon, that he, of course, he had to resign a year or two after he was reelected because of his unethical behavior. But when he went to China and reestablished diplomatic relations with China, it was seen as something like of a masterstroke. That even though America is losing in Vietnam, that America won because now we got China on our side, or we're moving China to our side against somebody that we don't like, and we don't like Moscow, the Soviet Union, and that you can say that's very shallow and it's very, very potentially dangerous, but that's the way Homo sapiens are, according to Hans Morgenthau. Hans Morgenthau did not have a very attractive portrayal of human nature. Hans Morgenthau viewed human nature as basically dark, and that people are driven by a desire to dominate for its own sake, and so, and you saw that under Donald Trump. I don't see where he really withdrew. I mean, he didn't. Okay, he made the deal with the Taliban that was agreed right before the pandemic started in early 2020, that the United States, and he negotiated with the Taliban without talking to the government in Kabul, in Afghanistan, the pro-American government there. They weren't involved in the negotiations. He negotiated with the Taliban that America would leave by May 2021. And this is back in January, February 2020, he agreed with that. And so, but then Trump lost re-election and was forced out, and Joe Biden became president and inherited Trump's agreement. But I was trying to compare, for example, with Nixon. For example, the United States in Vietnam, agreed that American soldiers would leave in 1973. They left. So Richard Nixon and Henry Kissinger reached this agreement, and American forces begin pulling out. And the casualties and the American casualties in the war begin to go down, way down, and then they leave in 1973. Nixon then resigns in 1974, and then in 1975, South Vietnam collapses, while Gerald Ford, Nixon's vice president, is now president. So Nixon's not there to deal with the collapse of South Vietnam. He's already out. But then but then Ford pays the price because he loses election to Jimmy Carter in 1976, because Ford wants to get elected as president after Nixon resigns, and then he loses to Jimmy Carter. And Jimmy Carter it comes into office in January 1977, and then there a series of events happen that the Republicans then portray as due to Jimmy Carter's weaknesses. you see the American friend of the United States, the Shah of Iran, that the CIA put in power in 1953. His regime begins to collapse. The communists come to power in Nicaragua, the Sandinistas. They're putting pressure on America's pro-American conservative right-wing forces in El Salvador and in Honduras. There's a socialist revolution in Grenada, and everybody's blaming Jimmy Carter for this. Not everybody, but the Republicans are blaming Jimmy Carter for this. Then America's, as I said, America's ally, the Shah of Iran, collapses, and then the American embassy personnel are held hostage for 444 days in 1979. And then the Soviet Union invades Afghanistan in Christmas time, 1979. And in the meantime, also the economy in the United States is in bad shape. There's high inflation, like 24% a year, which we haven't seen before in the United States. And the Republicans are all claiming that Jimmy Carter is a disaster, that Jimmy Carter is all to blame for this. And Ronald Reagan emerges into power and wins the election in 1980 and claims that he is going to mobilize the United States to defeat the evil empire, the Russian version of Nazi Germany. And Ronald Reagan gives an important speech in 1983 in which he says that, the Soviet Union is responsible for most of the bad things going on in the world, like even the Islamic Revolution in Iran. The Soviet Union somehow they're to blame for that. And there's not a withdrawal from the United States from the world affairs. So there's a big expansion in the defense budget in the United States under Ronald Reagan. And then he gets the credit, rightly or wrongly, for the end of the Cold War. Basically, communism collapsing in Eastern Europe in 1989, in the fall of 1989, and then the Soviet Union itself disappearing by the end of 1991. And Ronald Reagan, even though he's out of office by 1989, his vice president becomes president, George H.W. Bush. Still, Ronald Reagan is portrayed, rightly or wrongly, as the person responsible, representing the reinvigorated American will and determination that Jimmy Carter and the Democrats failed to provide. And so, and the point is that Ronald Reagan he's been dead now for what, 16 years, but they renamed the airport in Washington, D.C. after him. He's considered to be one of the greatest, not by everybody, but many people consider him to be one of the greatest presidents ever because of the victory of the United States, the supposed victory of the United States in the Cold War. But there's not been any kind of withdrawal of the United States from international affairs, even under Donald Trump, right? He reduced American the only thing he did was Afghanistan. And, and like Nixon, he wasn't in office when Kabul fell, just like Nixon was in office when Saigon fell to the North Vietnamese. So the Republicans are now claiming that, Joe Biden, oh my God, he should resign. We should, the foreign secretary of state of the United States or the generals, they should resign. They should be impeached. This is a disaster. So we'll see what how the next elections will impact U.S. foreign policy. Who's going to vote? I do know that there was a significant decline in public opinion polling of the positive evaluation of Joe Biden went down significantly after that Kabul government collapsed. And those pictures of those people trying to get on the American plane, and as the American plane's flying away and falling off the plane as the plane takes off, and then there was a bomb that killed 14 American soldiers, 170, Afghan civilians. There was a drop in public opinion polling, public opinion approval for Joe Biden significantly below 50% for the first time right after that happened. Now, so what's going to happen, even though America, if it's overextended, you might understand that, I might understand that, but you typical American's not going to know what you're talking about. because as Hook emphasizes in the book, most people don't pay much attention to foreign affairs. They do watch TV. They do love being an American. They can watch these amazing images of people trying to get on the plane and then falling off the plane as the plane's is flying away. And that is a pretty striking, stark image. But if this is emphasized by people like Hans Morgenthau, a leader of a country is supposed to understand the people better than they understand themselves. And but that's difficult to say. I mean, Joe Biden is only one person. It looks like the entire national security establishment in the United States underestimated the weakness of that government that the Americans installed in Kabul. I mean, I think they had like 3 elections in Afghanistan, or they tried to have like 3 national elections in Afghanistan. They had elections in South Vietnam too. But South Vietnam, I mean, they were able to stay and continue to stay there for another 1.5 years after the Americans left. Well, more than that, like almost 2 years, because I think it was in the spring of 1975 that South Vietnam collapsed. And it was in 1973, maybe 1.5 years. They thought the same thing might happen in Kabul, that they'll stay in power and they'll keep, they'll fight for a while but no, I mean, it was just overnight. They just disappeared. And the government. And so if you're going to argue that Americans they view themselves as overextended, I wouldn't rely so much on public opinion surveys. Because again, as I pointed out earlier, even this democratically controlled Congress increased the defense budget by another $24 billion more than the Biden administration requested. The Biden administration wanted to keep the budget the same as this year as it was last year under Trump. This democratically controlled Congress under the Democratic Party, they increased it. They put another $24 billion in it. So what does this overextension mean? I think it might well mean that it's good to try to interpret what that means in terms of globalization. Basically, if you're going to be a great power appealing to everybody around the world, that means you have to at least try to look like you're nice and accommodative to the world. So that means you have to bring in refugees. You have to be open to trade. You've got to integrate your economy with the Chinese economy and the Belgian economy and the European economy and you have to bring in refugees from other countries because refugees are fleeing persecution and hardship, and you have to be involved. And a lot of Americans are afraid of people and forces that they don't understand or they think threaten them. And so I think that was what I was. One way to understand the debate topic, the topic for the paper is America's globalization. That Hook emphasizes America set up the world that it dominates. It set up the rules. It set up the IMF, International Monetary Fund. It set up the World Trade Organization. It established the world capitalist trading system that the Chinese and the other actors have benefited from to develop themselves. Yet somehow some groups in the American public find the consequences of that system to be, in effect, to produce outcomes that they don't like. And they don't like because they seem to envy those people that are better prepared, like you, to benefit from that system. I mean, you're in my class, so your English is excellent. So are you Walloon or Flem?
Flemish.
So you speak Dutch?
Yeah, that's correct.
You speak French too?
Yeah.
I mean, that's amazing. You speak 3 languages. Yeah, I mean, and you speak them well. I mean, the world is like I tell myself, is your oyster. You're getting a college degree. You can speak 3 languages. You love globalization. You're taking a class at South Korea. Who knows where you're going to get a job? You know, you travel, you feel, I mean, the world, but a lot of Americans are not like Europeans, right? They're only like 1/3 of American adults have a 4-year college degree. So 2/3 do not. Americans don't study foreign languages the way Europeans do, right? I mean, yeah, I think everybody in Belgium has to start studying another language when the time they're born is from the time they enter school. It's not that way in the United States. So there's a lot of people that are, and they see that if you don't have a college degree, not to mention speak another foreign language, you're not going to have a very good paying job. Unless it's really difficult work. You know, if difficult physical work, you might make a good paycheck as a craftsman in the trades, in carpentry, or, you know, but that's hard work. But, you know, if you want a good paying job, you're going to have at least a 4-year degree. Otherwise, you're going to end up, you know, doing low paid service work. And there are a lot of people doing low paid service work who don't look white. They're Hispanic people, African-American people, and then Americans, because Americans tend to equate, because of their history, we talk about this in American history class, they tend to equate poverty with racial minorities because of the legacy of slavery. So the poorest people in America were the slaves, right? So you don't want to be like them. And so if you are working next door to people, with people who are Black and Hispanic, you might, and you're white, you think this is not right because I'm better than them. So why am I not having a good job? And people don't say that, but that's what a lot of people think and feel. So there's a lot going on that public opinion surveys are not going to reveal, because, and we know this, for example, that there's more and more problems with public opinion surveys because the people that do public opinion surveys, they keep making mistakes on predicting the elections. So Donald Trump was not supposed to win in 2016. And Joe Biden was supposed to do better than he did in 2020. I mean, like, and why? Because, and I heard this in I read this in the election coverage. People lie all of the time, not because they're nasty or bad, but just because they themselves don't want to admit to themselves what they really want. And people, so you know, people will lie to their priest, they will lie to their doctor. So they certainly will probably lie to a public opinion survey person who comes in and say, let me ask you some questions. Can I ask you, who are you going to vote for, Donald Trump or Joe Biden? And why do you like Joe Biden? And so what one group was doing, they were saying, they were not asking people who you're going to vote for. They would go to you, if you're interviewing you for in a public opinion survey, and they would ask you, who in your neighborhood, who's going to vote for Donald Trump? And get them to talk about other people, because they'll be more honest about other people than they will be about themselves. And you get insight into how they will vote from listening to them talk about how other people in the neighborhood, their neighbors, will vote. So I'm going off here. I want to make sure that we talk about the right things here. Yeah, okay, so make sure that the final link to the paper is not more than 550 words, not including the citations and everything. And make sure that no more than 10% of the papers is quoted text. So just like, you know, with the paragraphs. So yeah, make sure your sources are listed. Make sure you're using site information from 3 different chapters from the Hook textbook. So I see this is chapter 1. And is that chapter 2?
I think so.
Okay, and is there chapter 3? Is this another chapter? Okay, good. Okay, make sure. Yeah, so that's, I mean, one way to understand. You have any questions?
Not really.
Yeah, I mean, and even in Europe, there are people threatened by this. I mean, with the, obviously, what was that, Pim Fortuyn, and his right-wing party, and that's in Netherlands. I mean, in Belgium, what's the Vlaams party? The Vlaams party, that's the right-wing, far-right party in
Oh,
Belgium.
Vlaams Belang.
Yeah, Vlaams Belang.
Yeah.
So you see these forces emerging, not just in the United States, but it's hard to imagine that Vlaams Belang is going to, form a government. There it seems to be more limited, although we'll see what happens in France. I mean, that's what everybody's watching to see, in terms of reacting to Europeanization, globalization. If Marine Le Pen or someone else, this guy or Kumal, I can't remember, this right-wing commentator who's might run for president, might do well in France. But it's, again, I think not so much. Well, it's a combination of factors, but when we talk about migration of non-European people into Belgium, or France or Germany, that's what triggers a lot of this right-wing populism. Although, when leading up to the Brexit vote, there was a lot of commentary about how a lot of British people are unhappy about going into stores and finding lots of Polish newspapers and Polish products, because up to 1 million Polish people moved to Britain after Poland joined the European Union to get jobs. And so, but when you looked at the campaign literature, propaganda posters that were put out in favor of the Brexit vote to leave the European Union, they emphasized the non-white migrants coming into Europe, that if they come into Europe, they're going to get into Britain somehow. And that's probably, but that guy, well, no, that's, again, I don't want to mix them up, but it's not just in the United States, but the United States seems to be least prepared to deal with this, less prepared than European states to deal with the impacts of globalization. Because Europeans have always been more aware of, the impacts of international affairs on domestic affairs. And that's something that the Americans have only become more aware of during the Cold War. So I guess that's where I'll stop. I don't think I made any other changes here. So if you don't have any questions, do you have any questions?
Not really. I think everything was clear.
Okay. Well, then I guess that's where we'll stop. Okay. And I will see you next week. Bye.
Okay. Thank you very much.